Hey guys, welcome to today's video. I apologize in advance if there's any noise in the background. As soon as I started filming, everybody decided to start doing activities outside, so you might hear like a gardener outside and like trucks and just all sorts of stuff. So I apologize if you hear any of that. Today I wanted to cover the topic of writing your own spells, rituals, or ceremonies. And I figured that this would be a good subject to go over because it could be part of the Spiritual 101 on my channel, and I figured that it was something that people might want to know. And before I get started, I do want to point out that everybody has different ways of doing things. I know that I do my stuff a certain way, and you may do stuff in your practice a certain way, and it doesn't mean that your way is the right way or my way is the right way. It just means that everybody has different preferences. So if any of these things that I suggest or mention or suggest not to do or to do, things like that, don't fit with what you do in your practice or what you feel comfortable with, then by all means, please cut that out and just use whatever out of this video that you feel comfortable using. These are just my suggestions and what I personally use in my practice and when I write my spells and rituals and ceremonies. So before we get started, I do want to mention that the page that I have here with me, which is this page, is actually from my old Book of Shadows. And I did show you guys the inside of my Book of Shadows in one of my previous videos, and I'll link that video down below. And if I happen to have my new video of my Book of Shadows that I'm working on right now up, I'll link that down below as well. But I feel like that will take a while before I actually upload that because I do want to take my time with it and feel like I'm really at a place where it's where I want it to be before I start filming and showing you guys what's inside of it. But the reason why I wanted to show you guys a page from my old Book of Shadows is because this was how I used to lay out my spells and rituals. Because I was new to doing rituals and spells and things like that, I wanted to have it in a layout that was really easy for me to follow. So I would list all of the ingredients first, and then I would have a step-by-step layout of how I would do the ceremony or ritual. And this was really helpful when I was starting out because there were certain ways that I liked doing things, but I didn't want to forget how I did it. And you know when you do something and you really enjoy the way you do it, but then you forget how you do it the next time? I didn't want that to happen in my practice. And I tend to be a little bit of a control freak when it comes to doing things like this for me. So when I would do a ritual, I would want to do it step by step how I had done it before. I don't follow this way of writing out my rituals anymore simply because I feel more confident in doing ritual and doing spells and things like that. I have more confidence in it, so all I really need to do is lay out the ingredients I use and things that I'll need for it. So instead of laying it out step by step of you put the candle here and then you move the candle there and then you wave your wand over here. Instead of having those step-by-step guidelines in my spells that I had written out, I wanted to have it more free-flowing and have it more open. So that's what I'm doing right now in my Book of Shadows, and I wanted to mention that even without having you guys watch the new video on my new Book of Shadows, but because I wanted you guys to see and compare with this page, but I wanted you guys to know the general way of how I write my spells now compared to how I would write it when I was first starting out. Now that I've shown you guys the general way that I would set up my spells and rituals before, I want to go over different key points in how I come up with a spell or a ritual. The first thing I like to do is decide what my spell or ritual or ceremony will be for. Is it going to be centered about manifesting things? Is it going to be centered around releasing things? Am I trying to have a spell that brings me more luck? What do I want it to be centered on? And once I decide what those spell or ritual is for, then it will help me move towards the ingredients that I want to use and the steps that I want to incorporate in the spell. Next, you want to decide what kind of items, activities, and outcomes you want from this ritual and the spell. So this would be deciding whether you want to include chanting in your ritual. Do you want to include dancing in your ritual? Do you want to include herbs? Make a list of what you want to include into your ritual so you won't forget what you want to incorporate. Next, after you've decided what you want to incorporate into your spell or ritual, then you gather it all together. So if you want to include herbs and you want to have the ritual about releasing, find herbs that are specifically geared towards helping you release things. Maybe your spell or ritual is about manifesting and you want to include chanting. Find chants that will help manifest or help bring the things that you want to bring in to be. So find chants like abracadabra and things like that that can help manifest what you're trying to manifest. My next step is writing out every single detail of how I want that ritual to go. And even if I don't use all of the steps that I've outlined in my writing, at least I know how I'm going to be using the ingredients and the activities that I want to include into that ritual and ceremony. So by laying it all out and writing it down detail by detail, you're giving yourself the opportunity to really incorporate everything you want to incorporate and see where it fits in. After I've done that, after I've outlined everything that I want to do to the tiniest detail, then I go back through and I read it and I take away extra bits like, I place the candle here or something like that, and I would break it down into simpler actions. So instead of saying, I take the candle from the box and place it on the north point, I would just say, you place a candle at north and say this thing. And it makes it a lot easier and more to the point. And like I said, even though I don't find the need to write it out in detail of everything that I need to do in that ritual now in my practice, I do find it valuable to still write it out to see where I want to incorporate things and how I want to incorporate it. So all in all, that is how I write the spells and rituals that I do. And this process has really helped me to narrow down how I want to do my rituals and why I like to do them that way. But before I end the video, I do want to mention a couple things that I would suggest refraining from, simply from my experiences and from experiences that other people have shared with me. One of the biggest things that I can recommend is don't incorporate or add anything that you would feel uncomfortable doing or adding. If you don't feel comfortable with chanting, don't include it. Don't feel like you have to include a certain ingredient or a certain way of doing things if you don't feel comfortable with it. If you don't want to make an animal sacrifice, do not include it in your ritual or spell. I mean, I don't really recommend it anyway, just because I love animals and I don't feel like they should be sacrificed or anything for the sake of anything. I don't care what you're doing, just don't kill the animals. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't include it. If you don't feel comfortable dancing naked around a fire in the middle of winter, then don't do it. Just because someone else does something a certain way and that works for them, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you, and it doesn't mean it has to be something that you're comfortable with. Not only will you feel uncomfortable doing it, but it will bring bad energy into the spell and ritual. And this doesn't mean that you have to be all rainbows and butterflies going into a ritual, because like with releasing rituals, sometimes you're going to go in with sadness and hurt and guilt and anger and fear, but that is an opportunity for you to release those things. So I don't mean it that way, but just don't go in doing something that you don't feel comfortable doing just because you feel the need to do it because other people do it. You should be doing your spells and rituals in ways that you feel comfortable doing them. I personally like to do mine naked because I just feel more comfortable that way. But some people might like to wear a pretty dress, or some people might like to wear a cloak. Whatever you feel comfortable doing, do that. Don't dress a certain way or act a certain way because you feel that someone else expects that from you. And if this means having to do the ceremony or ritual alone, even though you wanted to do it with other people, it's better to do it alone than with other people who are going to make you feel that you need to do it in a certain way that you're uncomfortable with. Another thing I would recommend is a lot of people, when they're first getting started with spell work, ritual work, things like that, they expect a certain outcome from things, and they have in their head a way of how things are going to work out. Granted, it's good to have clear intention of what you want to happen and how you want it to happen, but you also have to have realistic expectations that it may not turn out that way. And the reason I say this is because the universe works in mysterious ways, and that's what people say. But ultimately, the universe will bring about something that you want to have in your life if it's meant to be. So this always comes back to the saying that I really live by, which is, if it's meant to happen, it will happen whether you want it to or not. And if it's not meant to happen, it won't happen whether you want it to or not. So if you want something to happen and it's meant to happen, it will happen in the way that it's supposed to happen. And granted, that kind of brings about the question of, well, do we really need to do ritual, or do we need to do spells if that's the saying that you live by? But the way I feel about it is that I want to feel that I've contributed to that intention and contributed to that outcome. And me as a person, I know that I like to feel that I have some control over the situation because I get very uncomfortable with not feeling in control. So because of that, I like to feel that I've taken the steps to make something happen, even if I had nothing to do with the outcome. It's still me feeling that I've contributed in some way. The last thing that I would recommend not doing is also personal preference to me. And the reason why I say this is because some people will disagree with me on this because some people feel comfortable doing this. I personally don't. So please take this with a grain of salt. But I do feel like I have to mention this just for the safety of others. I always recommend that people don't incorporate practices, outcomes, activities, or spell work that would cause harm to you or someone else or another living being. If you accidentally burn a moth because it flies into your candle flame, it's not your intention, it's not your fault, it just happened to do it, it's nature. But for example, animal sacrifices, human sacrifices, things like that, or incorporating things where you're causing bodily harm, like breaking bones or cutting yourself, I just don't recommend it, and I don't feel like it's super necessary. I know that people feel like doing these things can sometimes increase the power of the spell, but if you want to use blood in your spell, try to use your period blood. And I know that sounds weird, but using period blood can work just the same as using fresh blood from your hand. Again, it is personal preference. I'm not going to tell anybody how to do their practice, but it's just not something that I would feel comfortable with, so it's something that I felt the need to extend to you guys and let you guys know that I don't personally believe that it makes a difference in the spell work, incorporating sacrifice or something like that, but again, it's personal preference. So I did feel like I needed to mention that just because it's always important to stay safe and keep the people around you and the beings around you safe, and I just don't like the idea of causing something else harm on purpose and incorporating that energy into my practice. But again, that is personal preference. So with all of this said, I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos from me. If you want to be notified when I go live or when I post a new video, you can press the little bell icon next to the subscribe button and hit always, and that way you'll be notified whenever I post a new video or I go live on my channel. If you have any comments or video suggestions for me, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll do my best to answer your comments as well as adding the video suggestions to my video making list. As always, I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!